They say blood is thicker than water, but for 17-year-old Lyra, her stepmother's blood was filled with nothing but venom and ash. Trapped in a dying settlement where the Packless had no rights and the law belonged to whoever could shift the fastest, she woke every morning expecting the leather strap and went to bed praying her wolf would finally wake to save her. She thought this was her fate, to be a punching bag for a bitter woman until she withered away into nothing. But destiny has a strange way of intervening. Sometimes salvation doesn't come in the form of a knight in shining armor. Sometimes it comes as a terrifying silent shadow from the frozen peaks. A half-wolf the settlement whispered about in fear. A man who didn't ask for permission. This is the story of how a quiet mountain alpha stole a broken girl away from hell, and the shocking life she found in the snow. Hello friends. Before we journey deeper into Lyra's story, I invite you to subscribe and share in the comments where you're listening from. Your presence here matters. Now, let's continue. The ash in Thorn Hollow didn't just settle on the ground. It pressed down on you like a suffocating blanket, coating everything in a layer of grey despair, including the rough-hewn floorboards of the small wooden cabin at the edge of the settlement where Lyra lived. Lyra scrubbed the wood until her knuckles were raw and bleeding, the harsh lye soap stinging her cracked skin. She didn't dare look up. She could hear the rhythmic creak, creak, creak of the rocking chair in the corner. It was the sound of a ticking bomb. You missed a spot, a voice rasped, thick with malice and cheap grain alcohol. Lyra flinched. It was a reflex honed over years of conditioning. I'll get it, Marin. I'm sorry. Marin Ashwood didn't look like a mother. She looked like a crow that had learned to walk upright, all sharp angles, yellowed teeth, and eyes that gleamed with a hunger for cruelty. Her face was gaunt, her hair streaked with premature grey, and her temper was as volatile as summer lightning. She stood from the rocking chair with a groan and walked over to where Lyra knelt. Without a word, Marin kicked the wooden bucket. Grey water sloshed across the floor, flooding the spot Lyra had just dried. Look at you, Marin spat, her voice trembling with a hatred that seemed to have no origin other than her own misery. Clumsy. Worthless. Just like your cursed mother before the pack wars took her. You think scrubbing a floor pays for the roof over your head? Does it pay for my food? My medicine? No, Marin, Lyra whispered, staring at the spreading puddle. Get up. Marin hissed. She grabbed a fistful of Lyra's blonde hair, yanking her to her feet. Lyra bit her lip to keep from screaming. She had learned long ago that screaming only made the beatings last longer. Marin's other hand found the leather strap hanging on the wall, the one with the brass rivets. Since you can't clean properly, maybe pain will teach you focus. The first strike landed across Lyra's shoulders. Then another. And another. Lyra counted them silently, as she always did. 1, 2, 3, 4. She disappeared into her mind, into the fading memory of her real mother's face, the sound of a lullaby she could barely remember. When Marin finally tired, Lyra crumpled to the floor, tears streaming silently down her ash-streaked face. Get down to Elder Torvin's storage shed, Marin snapped, breathing heavily. He needs the grain sacks moved. Don't you come back without 2 coppers. If you do, well, she patted the leather strap. We'll continue our lesson. Lyra scrambled out the door, the rough wood slamming shut behind her. The ash-grey sky was a welcome relief from the darkness of the cabin. She wiped tears from her cheek, leaving streaks through the dirt, and hurried toward the settlement center. Thorn Hollow was a mean place filled with broken people. The Packless, those whose wolves never woke, or who'd been exiled from their clans, scraped out a bitter existence farming rocky soil beneath skies that never seemed to clear. Shifters with hollow eyes watched Lyra pass, their gazes lingering with a mixture of pity and contempt. The girl whose wolf wouldn't wake. The cursed one. She kept her head down, focused on the worn path beneath her feet. She entered the settlement's communal storage area, where Elder Torvin kept the grain. He was weighing sacks when she arrived, his weathered face creased with permanent disappointment. He was not a cruel man, But in Thorn Hollow, decency was often overruled by self-preservation. He saw the fresh welts on Lyra's arms, visible where her sleeve had torn. But he looked away, shuffling his ledger. "Afternoon, Lyra," he mumbled. "Marin sent you." "Yes, sir. She said you might have work." Torvin sighed, rubbing his grizzled beard. "I don't have much today, girl. The last harvest was poor. Most folks can't pay for labor." Lyra's heart hammered against her ribs. If she went back empty-handed, Marin wouldn't just use the strap. She'd use the fire poker, or worse, lock Lyra in the root cellar for days. Panic rose in her throat like bile. "Please, Elder Torvin. Anything. I can move sacks, I can sort the spoiled grain, I can." Torvin looked pained. He reached into his pocket and pulled out 2 tarnished copper coins. "It's charity, Lyra. Take it and go. I can't have her coming down here making a scene again." Lyra's hands trembled as she took the coins. They felt impossibly heavy. Suddenly, the temperature dropped. The air itself seemed to shift, growing thick and electric. The settlement dogs began to whine, then fell silent. The scattered conversations of people nearby died mid-sentence. Even the ravens that circled overhead seemed to scatter. Lyra felt every hair on her body stand on end, a primal response she didn't understand. She turned slowly. Standing at the edge of the storage yard was a mountain. He had to be 6.5 feet tall, maybe more. He wore furs that looked like they'd been taken from wolves and bears, thick pelts laid over a frame of pure muscle. His boots were heavy leather, caked in mud and snow from the high trails. Dark hair fell past his shoulders, and a thick beard covered the lower half of his face. A wide-brimmed hat shadowed his eyes, but Lyra could feel them, piercing, assessing, ancient. This was Rook. They called him the Shadow Wolf of Blackwood Peak. He came down from the mountains perhaps twice a year to trade furs for salt, ammunition, and dried goods. Rumors swirled around him like snow in a blizzard. They said he was half feral, that he'd killed a dozen pack warriors in the border wars, that he could shift into something between man and wolf that defied nature itself. He walked toward the storage shed, his heavy footsteps deliberate and unhurried. The smell of pine resin, wood smoke, and something wild, something other, preceded him. Elder Torvin went pale. Rook. Didn't expect you until spring thaw." Rook didn't answer. He simply dropped a massive bundle wrapped in oilcloth onto the wooden table. When he opened it, Lyra glimpsed pristine pelts, silver fox, winter ermine, wolf fur so white it seemed to glow. A fortune in furs. Lyra tried to slip past him toward the exit, terrified to be in his presence. But as she moved, her worn boot caught on a raised stone. She stumbled, falling hard against Rook's arm. It was like colliding with a granite cliff. He didn't move even an inch. Lyra gasped, recoiling as if she'd touched hot iron. "I'm sorry. I'm so sorry, sir." She waited for the blow. In Thorn Hollow, you got hit when you were clumsy. It was the way of things. She squeezed her eyes shut, hunching her shoulders, making herself small. Silence. Slowly, she opened one eye. Rook was looking down at her. His eyes were a startling clear gray, like winter ice over deep water. They weren't angry. They were curious. Searching. His gaze dropped to the welts on her arms. Then to her raw, bleeding knuckles. Then to the trembling fear radiating from every inch of her small frame. He looked back at Elder Torvin. When he spoke, his voice was a deep rumble, like distant thunder rolling through a mountain canyon. "Who is she?" Torvin swallowed audibly. That's Lyra. Marin Ashwood's stepdaughter." Rook's eyes returned to Lyra, and for one terrifying moment, she thought he might hurt her for the collision. Instead, something shifted in those winter-gray eyes. Something that looked almost like recognition. Or fury. The silence in the storage yard stretched like a bowstring pulled too tight. Lyra could feel the weight of Rook's gaze on her, heavy, assessing, impossibly intense. She wanted to run, to disappear into the ash-gray landscape, but her feet might as well have been rooted to the ground. Elder Torvin cleared his throat nervously. She's packless, Rook. Her wolf never woke. Marin took her in after her mother died in the border wars. It's charity, really. The girl works for her keep. Rook's jaw tightened beneath his beard. His eyes never left the welts on Lyra's arms, the purple bruise blooming on her cheekbone, the way she held herself, small, broken, expecting pain. Packless, he repeated, his voice like gravel grinding against stone. Or dormant. Torvin blinked, confused. What's the difference? Rook didn't answer. Instead, he reached out slowly, giving Lyra time to flinch away if she wanted to. When she didn't move, frozen in terror, his massive hand gently turned her arm, examining the fresh welts more closely. His touch was surprisingly careful, as though he were handling something fragile and precious. How long? He asked quietly. I don't understand, Lyra whispered, her voice barely audible. How long has she been hitting you? The question landed like a stone in still water. No one had ever asked before. No one had ever cared. Since my father married her. I was 7. 10 years. The words hung in the air like smoke. Rook released her arm and straightened to his full, intimidating height. He turned to Torvin. Where does the woman live? Now wait just a moment. Torvin started, but the look Rook gave him could have frozen a river mid-flow. Where does she live? Torvin pointed with a shaking hand toward the cluster of cabins at the settlement's edge. The one with the blue door. But Rook, Marin's got a mean streak. She won't take kindly to. Rook was already walking, his long strides eating up the distance. He didn't ask Lyra to follow. He simply expected it. And somehow, despite every instinct screaming at her to run in the opposite direction, Lyra found herself trailing behind him like a shadow. The settlement parted before him like water before the bow of a ship. Mothers pulled their children indoors. Men found sudden urgent business elsewhere. Even the mangy dogs slunk away, tails between their legs. By the time they reached Marin's cabin, a small crowd had gathered at a safe distance, drawn by the spectacle like moths to flame. Rook didn't knock. He simply pushed the door open, the hinges groaning in protest. Marin was inside, counting the 2 copper coins Lyra had brought home earlier, a bottle of cheap spirits at her elbow. She looked up, and her face cycled rapidly through confusion, fear, then a calculated kind of cunning. Well, she said, her voice taking on a honeyed tone that made Lyra's skin crawl. The Shadow Wolf himself. To what do I owe the honor? Her eyes raked over his furs, his weapons, clearly calculating his worth. Rook stepped inside, and the small cabin seemed to shrink around him. He looked around slowly, taking in the squalor, the empty bottles, the leather strap hanging prominently on the wall, the bucket of dirty water, the thin bedroll in the corner where Lyra slept. His expression didn't change, but Lyra felt the temperature in the room drop several degrees. I hear you have need of coin, Rook said, his voice flat, emotionless. Marin's eyes lit up with greed. Everyone needs coin. Times are hard for us packless folk. The settlement barely supports us, and I've got this one to feed. She gestured dismissively at Lyra, eating me out of house and home. Lyra flinched at the lie. She ate perhaps once a day, and never enough to fill her stomach. Rook reached into his coat with deliberate slowness. He pulled out a leather pouch, heavy and clinking with the unmistakable sound of precious metal. He placed it on the rickety table with a solid thunk. Marin's breath caught. What's in there? Silver. Enough to buy this cabin 3 times over. Enough to leave this settlement and never look back. Enough to drink yourself into the grave if that's your wish. Marin's fingers twitched toward the pouch, but she held back, suspicious. What do you want for it? I've got some stored grain, some preserved meat from last autumn. I don't want your grain, Rook interrupted, his voice cutting through her rambling like a blade through silk. Then what? Marin's eyes narrowed. You're not exactly known for charity, Shadow Wolf. Rook slowly, deliberately, lifted one finger. He pointed directly at Lyra. Her. The word fell into the room like an executioner's axe. Lyra felt the blood drain from her face. The room seemed to tilt beneath her feet. Marin's mouth opened, then closed. She looked at Lyra, then at the heavy pouch of silver, then back at Lyra. Her expression was one of pure calculation, no shock, no maternal outrage, just cold arithmetic. You want to buy her? Marin said slowly, a cruel smile beginning to form. Like livestock. I want to remove her from your custody, Rook corrected, his voice like iron. Call it whatever you like. And what exactly do you plan to do with a packless girl? Marin's tone was mocking, but her hand was already creeping toward the pouch. That, Rook said quietly, is not your concern. Do we have an agreement? Lyra wanted to scream, to protest, to run. But where would she go? Back to this cabin? To the leather strap and the fire poker and the endless cycle of pain? At least with Rook, the end might be quicker. Cleaner. Marin untied the pouch and poured a few silver coins onto the table. Her eyes went wide, each coin was pure silver, marked with the old pack symbols. This wasn't settlement currency. This was real wealth. Done, Marin said instantly, sweeping the coins back into the pouch and clutching it to her chest. Take her. She's more trouble than she's worth anyway. Eats too much, works too slow, and that wolf of hers will never wake. Cursed blood, just like her mother. Rook's eyes flashed with something dangerous, but his voice remained steady. If I hear you've spoken of this transaction to anyone beyond this room, I will return. And I will not bring silver next time. It wasn't a threat. It was a simple statement of fact. Marin clutched her silver tighter and nodded quickly. Rook turned to Lyra. Get your things. Lyra stood frozen, her mind unable to process what was happening. I don't have. Her voice trailed off. She owned nothing. Nothing except. She moved to her corner, knelt down, and pried up the loose floorboard. Tucked underneath was her only possession, a small carved wooden wolf her mother had made, worn smooth from years of Lyra holding it during the worst nights. She clutched it to her chest and stood. I'm ready. Rook studied her for a long moment, something unreadable crossing his features. Then he pulled off his outer fur cloak and draped it over her shoulders. It was massive on her small frame, still warm from his body heat, and it smelled like pine and snow and something wild that made her wolf-less instincts shiver. Come, he said simply, and walked toward the door. Marin didn't even look up from counting her silver. Don't come crying back when he's done with you, she called out, her voice already slurred from the bottle she'd opened. Lyra followed Rook out into the ash-grey morning. The crowd that had gathered whispered and pointed, but no one intervened. No one ever did. As they walked away from the only home she'd ever known, Lyra took one last look back. The cabin with the blue door looked even smaller and more pathetic from a distance. It had never been a home. It had been a prison. And now she was walking toward the mountains with a man the settlement called a monster, a shadow, a killer. She should have been terrified. Instead, she felt something she hadn't felt in 10 years, the faint, fragile stirring of hope. They walked in silence through Thornhollow's narrow pathways, past the communal well where women stopped their gossip to stare, past the smokehouse where men pretended not to notice but tracked every step. Lyra kept her head down, swimming in Rook's massive fur cloak, her small carved wolf clutched so tightly in her hand that the wooden edges bit into her palm. Rook's wagon waited at the settlement's edge, a sturdy buckboard hitched to 2 massive draft horses, both dark as midnight. The horses stamped and snorted as they approached, but when Rook placed a hand on the nearest one's neck, they stilled immediately. He turned to Lyra and gestured to the wagon bed. Get in. Lyra hesitated, staring at the weathered wooden planks. Once she climbed into that wagon, there was no going back. The settlement would disappear behind her. Marin would spend her silver on drink. And Lyra would belong to the shadow wolf. I won't ask twice, Rook said, but his tone wasn't harsh. Just matter-of-fact. Lyra grabbed the side of the wagon and pulled herself up, her muscles trembling from exhaustion and fear. The bed was lined with more fares and held supplies, sacks of grain, ammunition boxes, coils of rope, and a rifle secured against the side rails. Rook climbed onto the driver's bench with surprising grace for such a large man. He took up the reins, clicked his tongue once, and the horses began to move. As the wagon rolled forward, Lyra watched Thornhollow shrink behind them. The ash-grey cabins, the perpetually clouded sky, the people who had watched her suffer for 10 years without lifting a finger, all of it fading into the distance. Good riddance, she thought, surprising herself with the venom in her own mind. They traveled for perhaps an hour in complete silence. The landscape gradually transformed around them, the barren, ash-covered settlement giving way to scrub brush, then to sparse pine trees, then to proper forest. The air grew cleaner, sharper, carrying the scent of snow from the high peaks ahead. Lyra shivered despite the fur cloak. She had never been this far from the settlement. Never. The farthest she'd gone was to the stream where the women washed clothes, barely a mile from the cabins. Finally, unable to bear the silence any longer, she spoke. "Where are you taking me?" Rook didn't turn around. "My territory. In the mountains." "And then what?" Her voice was barely above a whisper. "Then you live." The simplicity of the statement caught her off guard. "I don't understand." This time, Rook did turn his head slightly, enough that she could see his profile, the strong jaw beneath the beard, the sharp line of his nose, the way his eyes scanned the tree line constantly, alert for threats. "That woman was killing you," he said flatly. "Slowly. Another year, maybe 2, and you'd be dead. Infection from the beatings. Starvation. Or she'd go too far one night with that fire poker." Lyra's throat tightened. She knew he was right. She'd thought the same thing herself during the darkest nights. "So you bought me to save me?" She couldn't keep the skepticism from her voice. "Nobody does that. There's always a price." "There is a price," Rook agreed. "But not the one you're thinking." "Then what?" He was quiet for a long moment, guiding the horses around a fallen log. When he finally spoke, his voice was rougher, weighted with something Lyra couldn't identify. "You work. You learn. You earn your keep by helping maintain the cabin, processing game, gathering what can be gathered. In return, you get food, shelter, safety, and training." "Training?" Lyra repeated. "Training in what?" "Survival. How to read the forest. How to track. How to defend yourself." He paused. "How to wake your wolf, if she's sleeping and not dead." Lyra's breath caught. "You think my wolf isn't dead?" "I know she isn't." "How could you possibly?" "Because I can smell her," Rook interrupted, his voice absolute. "Faint. Buried deep. But there. Dormant doesn't mean dead, girl. It means waiting." Lyra wanted to believe him. Gods, she wanted to believe him so badly it hurt. But she'd spent 10 years being told she was cursed, broken, wrong. "And if you're wrong?" she asked quietly. "If I'm just packless? Just human? Then you're still safer with me than with her." He glanced back again, and this time his grey eyes held something that might have been kindness. "I don't beat what's mine. I don't starve what's under my protection. And I sure as hell don't sell people for silver." The words settled over Lyra like a blanket. Not warm, exactly, but steady. Real. "Why?" The question burst out of her before she could stop it. "Why did you pay so much? Why did you even notice me? Nobody else did. Nobody else cared." Rook was quiet for so long that Lyra thought he might not answer. The wagon creaked and rattled over the increasingly rough terrain, climbing steadily upward. Finally, "I was you once." Lyra blinked. "What?" "Different circumstances. Different pack. But I know what it's like to be powerless. To be at the mercy of someone who should protect you but only knows how to hurt you." His hands tightened on the reins. "I know what it's like when everyone sees and no one helps." "What happened to you?" "I got strong enough to leave. Strong enough to choose exile over submission." He turned his head fully now, pinning her with that intense grey stare. "And I swore that if I ever saw someone in that position again, I wouldn't look away like everyone looked away from me." Lyra felt tears prick her eyes but refused to let them fall. "I don't know how to repay you. I don't want repayment. I want you to survive. To learn. To become something more than what she tried to make you." He faced forward again. "The silver I gave her? I made that back in 1 winter of trapping. It cost me nothing. Your life is worth more than that." The words hit Lyra like a physical blow. Worth more. When had anyone ever implied she was worth anything? They continued climbing as the sun moved across the sky. The trees grew taller, denser. Snow began to appear in patches on the ground, then in larger swaths. The air grew so cold that Lyra's breath misted in front of her face. Her stomach growled audibly. Without a word, Rook reached into a pack beside him and pulled out a cloth-wrapped bundle. He tossed it back to her. "Eat." Lyra unwrapped it carefully. Inside was dried venison, hard cheese, and flatbread. Real food. More than she'd normally see in 3 days. She looked up at Rook's back, suspicious. "It's not poisoned," he said dryly, as if reading her thoughts. "If I wanted you dead, there are easier ways." The brutal honesty of it startled a laugh out of her, short and sharp and unexpected. When was the last time she'd laughed? She bit into the venison. It was tough and gamey, but it was the best thing she'd ever tasted. As she ate, watching the endless forest roll past, watching Rook's steady, capable hands guide the horses, watching the mountains grow larger ahead of them, Lyra felt something shift inside her chest. Not her wolf. Not yet. But something equally important, the first fragile thread of trust. They climbed for hours. The forest grew thicker, the air thinner, the cold more biting. Lyra pulled Rook's fur cloak tighter around herself, but even that massive garment couldn't quite keep out the chill that seemed to seep into her bones. She'd finished the food he'd given her and had been quietly studying him from the wagon bed, the way he moved with the sway of the buckboard, completely at ease, the way his eyes never stopped scanning the tree line, the way his entire body seemed coiled and ready despite his relaxed posture. "How much farther?" she finally asked, her voice small against the vast silence of the mountains. "We'll reach the lower boundary of my territory soon. The den is another 2 hours past that." "Territory," Lyra repeated. "Like a pack territory." "Like a territory," Rook corrected. "No pack. Just mine. Don't you get lonely?" The question hung in the cold air. Rook's shoulders tensed slightly, the first sign of discomfort she'd seen from him. Lonely is better than betrayed. Before Lyra could ask what he meant, Rook pulled the horses to a stop. He set the brake and climbed down, then reached up toward her. "We walk from here. Trail's too narrow for the wagon." Lyra hesitated, staring at his outstretched hands. They were huge, scarred, calloused, hands that could break her in half without effort. But they waited, patient and steady, not grabbing or demanding. She placed her hands in his, and he lifted her down as if she weighed nothing. Her legs were stiff from sitting, and she stumbled. Rook's hand shot out, steadying her with a grip on her elbow. "You'll need to get stronger," he observed, not unkindly. "That woman half-starved you." "Marin," Lyra said quietly. Her name was Marin. "I don't care what her name was." Rook released her elbow and moved to the wagon, pulling out a heavy pack. "Here. Carry this." Lyra took the pack and nearly collapsed under its weight. It had to be 40 pounds, maybe more. Rook raised an eyebrow. "Too heavy." Pride flared in Lyra's chest, the first spark of it she'd felt in years. "No. I can manage." Something that might have been approval flickered across Rook's face. He shouldered an even larger pack, slung the rifle across his back, and started walking. Lyra followed, struggling under the weight but refusing to complain. The trail was barely visible, just a slight depression in the snow and fallen pine needles. How Rook could see it, she had no idea. They walked in silence for 20 minutes before Lyra's legs began to shake. 30 minutes and she was stumbling. At 40 minutes, she tripped over an exposed root and went down hard, the pack driving the air from her lungs. Rook stopped and turned. He didn't mock her or show impatience. He simply waited as she struggled back to her feet, her face burning with shame. "I'm sorry," she gasped. "I'm trying." "Stop apologizing." His voice was firm but not harsh. "You're weak because she kept you weak. That changes now. But it doesn't change in a day." He adjusted the straps on her pack, redistributing the weight. "Better." Lyra nodded, not trusting her voice. They continued, and this time Rook walked more slowly, matching her labored pace. When they came to a frozen stream, he showed her where to step on the rocks to avoid breaking through the ice. When a branch heavy with snow hung low across the path, he held it aside until she passed under. Small kindnesses. Teaching without words. They were crossing through a particularly dense section of pines when Lyra saw them, massive paw prints in the snow, each one larger than her entire hand. She froze, her heart hammering. "Rook. I see them." "Are those wolf tracks?" "Yes." The prints were impossibly large, the stride between them suggesting something huge and powerful. Lyra felt her knees go weak. "Are we in danger?" Rook glanced at the tracks, then at her. "No. How can you be sure?" Because they are mine. Lyra stared at him, her mind struggling to process what he'd said. Yours? You mean you? I shift. When the moon calls or when I choose. These tracks are from 2 nights ago. He started walking again. The wolves here know my scent. They won't bother you as long as you're with me. But the settlement said you were half feral, that you'd forgotten how to be human. Rook's laugh was short and bitter. The settlement tells a lot of stories about things they don't understand. I shift because I choose to, not because I'm losing control. There's a difference. Lyra wanted to ask more, but the path had begun to climb steeply. All her energy went into putting one foot in front of the other, into not collapsing under the weight of the pack. Just when she thought she couldn't take another step, Rook stopped. We're here. Lyra looked up and saw nothing but a sheer rock face covered in ice and snow. I don't understand. Rook walked directly toward the cliff. At the last moment, he turned sideways and disappeared into what Lyra now saw was a narrow fissure in the rock, cleverly hidden by an outcropping. She followed, squeezing through the gap, and emerged into a concealed passage that opened into a massive cavern. Lyra's breath caught. The den was carved into the mountain itself, natural stone walls smoothed and shaped, a high ceiling with a natural chimney for smoke, a fire pit ringed with stones at the center. Furs were everywhere, covering the floor, hanging on the walls, piled into what looked like a sleeping area. Shelves had been carved directly into the rock, holding books, supplies, tools, and what looked like musical instruments. It was primitive and refined all at once. Wild and cultured. Like Rook himself. This is. Lyra couldn't find words. Rook set down his pack and began building a fire with practiced efficiency. This is home. Your chamber is through there. He gestured to a smaller passage leading off the main cavern. Lyra set down her pack with a groan of relief and walked to the passage. The chamber beyond was smaller but still spacious, with its own pile of furs, a shelf carved into the wall, and there's a lock, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. On the inside, Rook confirmed from the main cavern. Your space. Your safety. I don't enter without permission. Lyra touched the iron lock, her fingers trembling. A door that locked from the inside. A space that was hers. Safety that she controlled. For the first time in 10 years, she had a room where she could sleep without fear. She turned back to the main cavern, where Rook had the fire going and was already preparing what looked like a simple stew from dried meat and vegetables. Why are you doing all this? She asked, her voice thick with emotion she couldn't contain. Really? Rook looked up from the pot, the firelight casting shadows across his bearded face. For a long moment, he just studied at her. Then, because everyone deserves one person who doesn't look away. Everyone deserves one place where the door locks from the inside. And everyone deserves to know what it feels like to be safe. He returned his attention to the fire. Now sit. Eat. Rest. Tomorrow, your real education begins. Lyra woke to the smell of wood smoke and something cooking. Venison, she thought, mixed with wild herbs she couldn't name. For a disorienting moment, she forgot where she was. Then the events of the previous day came rushing back. Marin's cabin, the silver coins, Rook's massive form filling the doorway, the long climb into the mountains. She sat up slowly, her muscles screaming in protest. Every part of her body ached from yesterday's trek. The furs she'd slept in were softer than anything she'd ever known, and for the first time in her memory, she'd slept through the entire night without waking to the creak of Marin's rocking chair or the sound of a bottle being opened. Sunlight filtered through the natural chimney, painting golden streaks across the stone walls. She stood, wrapped one of the smaller furs around her shoulders, and ventured into the main cavern. Rook was crouched by the fire, turning something on a makeshift spit. He'd tied his dark hair back, and in the morning light, Lyra could see details she'd missed before, the scars on his hands, the deliberate way he moved, the constant awareness in his posture even while performing mundane tasks. You're awake, he said without turning around. Good. We have work to do. Lyra's stomach clenched with familiar anxiety. Work meant punishment if it wasn't done right. Work meant, eat first. Rook interrupted her spiraling thoughts, as if he could sense them. He handed her a wooden plate with roasted meat and what looked like root vegetables. Can't learn on an empty stomach. The food was simple but expertly prepared. Lyra ate slowly, savoring each bite, still half expecting it to be taken away. When you're finished, Rook said, settling across from her with his own plate, we start with tracking. The snow makes it easier to read signs. You'll learn to identify what passed through, when, and where it was heading. What if I'm not good at it? The question slipped out before she could stop it. Rook's grey eyes met hers. Then you practice until you are. Skill isn't born, Lyra. It's built. One step, one lesson, one failure at a time. The matter-of-fact tone steadied her. No anger. No impatience. Just simple truth. They spent the morning in the forest surrounding the den. Rook moved through the snow with barely a sound, pointing out tracks, disturbed branches, patches of fur caught on bark. His voice remained low, and even as he explained what each sign meant. Here, he said, kneeling beside a set of prints. Rabbit. See how the back paws land ahead of the front? That's how you identify them. Now you find the next set. Lyra studied the snow, her eyes straining to see what Rook saw so easily. At first, everything looked the same, just white interrupted by tree trunks and shadows. But gradually, her vision adjusted. She spotted a slight depression in the snow 10 feet away. There. Good. Rook stood. Keep going. She followed the trail for 30 yards before losing it near a cluster of rocks. Frustration bubbled up in her chest. I lost it. Where did you lose it? By those rocks. Then that's where you start looking again. Tracks don't just disappear. They redirect. Lyra circled the rocks, and there, a tiny tuft of fur caught on rough stone. The rabbit had squeezed through a gap she'd overlooked. I found it. Something that might have been a smile tugged at Rook's mouth. Then follow it. They tracked the rabbit until it vanished into a burrow, then moved on to deer tracks, bird scratches in the bark, the distinctive gait of a fox. By the time the sun reached its peak, Lyra's head was spinning with information, but her body thrummed with something unfamiliar, satisfaction. She was learning. Actually learning something useful, something that belonged to her. That afternoon, Rook taught her to build a proper fire, not the desperate smoky affairs she'd managed in the settlement, but controlled flames that produced heat without wasting wood. His hands guided hers, showing her how to arrange kindling, how to angle the larger pieces, how to read the smoke. Fire is life in the mountains, he explained. Respect it. Master it. Never take it for granted. When her fire caught on the third try, burning clean and hot, Lyra felt a surge of pride so strong it brought tears to her eyes. She blinked them back quickly. Rook noticed anyway. What is it? Nothing. I've never been good at anything before. You were never given the chance to be good at anything. He added another log to her fire. That changes now. Evening fell with startling swiftness in the mountains. They returned to the den, and Rook prepared another meal while Lyra explored the bookshelves more thoroughly. Most of the volumes were in languages she couldn't decipher, old Pack dialects, maybe, or something even more ancient. But one caught her eye, a leather-bound journal with no title. She pulled it down carefully, opened it to a random page, and saw Rook's handwriting, neat, controlled, surprisingly elegant. Exile is not punishment when you choose it. I walked away from a pack that valued dominance over dignity, power over protection. They called me weak for refusing their wars, their cruelty, their endless hierarchy of pain. I would make that choice again every day for the rest of my life. You read well for someone who was kept scrubbing floors. Lyra jumped, nearly dropping the journal. Rook stood in the chamber entrance, 2 bowls of stew in his hands. His expression was unreadable. I'm sorry, I shouldn't have. I wouldn't have left it accessible if I minded you reading it. He handed her a bowl. Your mother taught you. Lyra nodded, accepting the food. Before she died. She said words were power, that they couldn't be taken away once you learned them. She was right. Rook settled against the wall, his long legs stretched out before him. What else did she tell you? The question opened something in Lyra's chest, a door she'd kept locked for years. She said my wolf was sleeping, not dead. That she'd wake when I needed her most. Her voice dropped to barely a whisper. But I needed her every day with Marin. Every single day, and she never came. That's not how it works. Then how does it work? Rook was quiet for a long moment, his grey eyes distant. The wolf doesn't wake for survival. Survival is basic. You are doing that every day, just breathing, just enduring. The wolf wakes when you find something worth protecting. Something you love more than you fear the pain. I don't understand. You will. He took a bite of stew. Give it time. Later that night, Lyra lay in her chamber with the door locked, still marveling at that simple security. Through the stone walls, she could hear Rook moving in the main cavern, the soft sounds of him settling in for sleep. She closed her eyes and, for the first time in her life, tried to reach inward. Tried to find that dormant part of herself that Rook insisted was there. At first, nothing. Just darkness and the sound of her own breathing. But then, so faint she thought she might be imagining it, a presence. Distant. Sleeping. But there. Hello, Lyra thought tentatively. The presence shifted slightly, like something stirring in deep slumber but not quite waking. Lyra's eyes snapped open, her heart racing. It wasn't much. It wasn't proof. But it was more than she'd ever felt before. In the main cavern, Rook sat awake despite the late hour, staring into the dying embers of the fire. He'd sensed it too, that tiny flicker of awakening, faint as starlight but unmistakable. The girl's wolf was beginning to stir. 3 weeks passed in the high peaks. 3 weeks of tracking lessons and fire building, of learning to read the sky for coming storms and identify which plants could heal and which could kill. 3 weeks of Lyra's body growing stronger, her movements becoming surer, her eyes learning to see what the forest was trying to tell her. And 3 weeks of that faint presence inside her growing slightly less distant each night. She was skinning a rabbit under Rook's supervision when he suddenly went rigid. His head snapped toward the tree line, nostrils flaring, every muscle in his body coiling tight. Inside, he said, his voice dropping to that dangerous rumble she hadn't heard since the day they'd met. Now. What's wrong? Inside. Don't argue. The absolute authority in his tone sent Lyra scrambling toward the den. She'd learned to trust his instincts. They'd kept them safe from avalanches, cliff collapses, and a territorial bear that had wandered too close. But this felt different. This felt personal. Rook followed her into the cavern, moving with predatory speed. He began pulling supplies from various hiding spots, dried meat, water skins, ammunition, a wicked-looking hunting knife he strapped to his belt. We're leaving, he said flatly. 5 minutes. Take only what you can carry. Rook, what's happening? Hunters. 5 of them, maybe 6. Moving fast up the mountain. His jaw clenched beneath his beard. They're tracking us. Lyra's blood turned to ice. How do you know? I can smell them. And I recognize one of their scents. He shoved a pack into her hands. Fill this. Food first, then your furs. Move. Her hands shook as she grabbed supplies, her mind racing. Who would track them all the way up here? The settlement didn't care enough. Marin had her silver urn. The thought struck her like a physical blow. Marin told someone. Probably. Rook was loading his rifle with practiced efficiency. Doesn't matter now. What matters is getting you higher into the peaks where they can't. The door exploded inward. Not broken, just opened with such force that it slammed against the stone wall. 5 men poured into the den, spreading out with the coordination of experienced fighters. 4 carried rifles. The 5th, their leader, held something worse, silver chains that glinted in the firelight. He was tall, scarred, with eyes like frozen mud and a smile that made Lyra's skin crawl. Rook, the man said, his voice carrying mock friendliness. Been a long time, traitor. Rook positioned himself between the hunters and Lyra, his massive frame a living wall. Garrett. You remember me. I'm touched. Garrett's smile widened. The pack sends their regards. Well, actually, they sent me with orders to kill you and bring back the girl. But semantics. Lyra recognized 2 of the other men, settlement workers who used to watch her beatings with dead eyes. The other 2 were mercenaries, their weapons well maintained, their stances professional. You're not taking her, Rook said quietly. See, that's where you're wrong. Garrett took a step closer, the silver chains clinking. Your little stepmother was quite chatty after a few more drinks. Told us all about the golden-haired packless girl. Told us you paid a fortune in silver for her. made the pack very curious about why the great exile would spend so much on a worthless dormant. She's not. Oh, we know what she is now. Garrett's eyes slid to Lyra with predatory interest. Dormant alpha. Rare bloodline. Your stepmother was very thorough in her descriptions, girl. The pack alpha wants that bloodline. Wants to see if breeding with it might strengthen our next generation. Lyra felt bile rise in her throat. Breeding stock. They wanted her for breeding stock. Over my dead body, Rook growled. That's the idea, actually. Garrett nodded to his men. Take him. The fight erupted with brutal speed. Rook's transformation was partial and terrifying, his face elongating, fangs erupting, claws extending from his fingertips. He moved like liquid violence, taking down the first mercenary with a strike that sent the man crashing into the stone wall with bone-breaking force. The second mercenary got a shot off. The bullet grazed Rook's shoulder, drawing blood but barely slowing him. He grabbed the man's rifle, crushed the barrel with one clawed hand, and drove his fist into the hunter's solar plexus. But Garrett had planned for this. While Rook fought, the two settlement men circled around and grabbed Lyra. She fought back, all those weeks of training exploding into action. She drove her elbow into one man's throat exactly as Rook had shown her, heard him choke and stumble. She kicked the other's knee with everything she had, felt something give. But they were stronger, desperate, and willing to hurt her. One of them yanked her hair, slamming her head against the stone wall. Stars exploded across her vision. Lyra. Rook's roar shook the cavern. He tried to reach her, but Garrett was ready. The silver chains whipped out, wrapping around Rook's throat with practiced precision. The effect was immediate and horrifying. Rook's partial transformation reversed as he choked, his skin burning where the silver touched, smoke rising from the contact points. He collapsed to his knees, clawing at the chains, his face contorted in agony. Silver's a wonderful thing, Garrett observed, winding the chains tighter. Neutralizes even the strongest wolf. Reduces you to nothing but meat and pain. The settlement men dragged Lyra toward the entrance. She thrashed, bit, screamed, but they had her arms pinned. She watched in horror as Garrett pulled a silver dagger from his belt, its blade etched with runes that seemed to drink in the firelight. The Alpha said to make it quick, Garrett murmured, pressing the blade to Rook's throat. He sends his regards for your betrayal. Rook's grey eyes found Lyra's. Even burning, even dying, there was no fear in them. Only regret. Only sorrow that he couldn't protect her. And in that moment, watching the only person who'd ever shown her kindness about to be murdered, watching her future being ripped away to become some Alpha's breeding prize, something inside Lyra's chest didn't break. It hatched. The scream that tore from her throat transformed mid-breath into something else. Something wild. Something that had been sleeping for 17 years, waiting not for survival but for this, for something worth protecting more than she feared the pain. Her scream became a howl. The transformation was agony and ecstasy in equal measure. Lyra's bones cracked and reformed, the sound like ice breaking on a frozen lake. Her spine arched impossibly, muscles tearing and rebuilding. Her scream-toned howl echoed off the stone walls, primal and unstoppable. The small carved wolf her mother had given her fell from her pocket, landing in a spreading pool of blood. The settlement men released her instantly, stumbling backward in shock. Where a 17-year-old girl had been, there now stood a wolf. Not just any wolf. A massive golden-white creature with eyes like molten amber, easily the size of a small bear. Her fur seemed to shimmer in the firelight, and power radiated from her frame in waves that made the air itself feel heavy. Garrett's expression shifted from triumph to disbelief. Impossible. Dormants don't shift this violently. They don't. His words died as Lyra's wolf form locked eyes with him. She moved on pure instinct, no technique, no control, just primal rage and the desperate need to protect. The settlement man who'd grabbed her hair didn't even have time to raise his hands. One moment he was backing toward the entrance. The next, Lyra's jaws closed around his throat. The kill was instant. Blood sprayed across the stone floor. The man's body crumpled, and Lyra released him, her muzzle crimson, her amber eyes already seeking the next threat. The second settlement man tried to run. He made it 3 steps before Lyra was on him, her speed inhuman. She drove him to the ground, her massive paw crushing his chest. He screamed once before her teeth found him. The surviving mercenary dropped his rifle, hands raised. I surrender. Please, Lyra didn't understand surrender. Didn't understand mercy. The bloodlust sang in her veins, drowning out everything else. She lunged, and the mercenary's pleas ended in a wet gurgle. Through it all, Rook remained on his knees, the silver chains still burning his flesh. But his eyes, those winter-grey eyes, held something between horror and pride as he watched Lyra's wolf tear through the hunters. Garrett was the only one left. He'd dropped the dagger, and now scrambled for the silver chains, trying to use them as a weapon. Stay back. Lyra was faster. She hit him like an avalanche, driving him into the stone wall with enough force to crack the rock. Her massive paw pinned him to the ground, claws digging into his chest just enough to draw blood. Garrett's eyes were wide with terror, all his earlier confidence shattered. Don't, please. Lyra. Rook's voice cut through the red haze of her fury. It was the first time he'd used her name like that, not a request, but a command. Her wolf's head swiveled toward him, a snarl building in her throat. Let him go, Rook said, his voice strained from the silver bones but steady. You're not a killer. You're a protector. There's a difference. Lyra's wolf didn't understand the words, but something in his tone penetrated the bloodlust. She looked down at Garrett, at the blood on her claws, at the 3 bodies scattered across the den floor. What had she done? Let him carry the message back, Rook continued, slowly unwinding the silver chains from his own throat with hands that blistered and bled at the touch. Let him tell the pack what happens to hunters who threaten what's ours. The possessive word, ours, resonated through Lyra's wolf consciousness. Slowly, she lifted her paw from Garrett's chest. The hunter scrambled away, bleeding, terrified, broken. He stumbled toward the entrance, then paused to deliver his parting message through ragged gasps. The Alpha will send an army for her. You've only delayed the inevitable. They'll never stop hunting you now. Then he was gone, fleeing into the snow. Lyra's transformation reversed as violently as it had begun. One moment she was a massive golden wolf. The next, she was collapsing to the stone floor, human, naked, shaking, covered in blood that wasn't hers. Rook moved immediately, wrapping her in furs despite the pain from his burned hands. He held her carefully as sobs racked her body. I killed them, she gasped. I killed. Oh gods, I killed. You protected us, Rook said firmly, his arms steady around her trembling frame. You did what you had to do. But I couldn't stop. I didn't want to stop. I wanted, her voice broke. What's wrong with me? Nothing is wrong with you. Your wolf woke for the first time. That kind of power, that kind of rage, it takes time to control. He pulled back slightly to look at her face. Your mother was right, Lyra. Your wolf was sleeping. And now she's awake. Lyra buried her face against his chest, her tears mixing with the blood and ash. Around them, the den was a battlefield, bodies cooling, silver chains scattered, the smell of death thick in the air. And outside, somewhere in the darkness, Garrett was carrying word back to the pack. Word of a golden wolf with power that defied nature. Word of a dormant alpha who'd awakened in a blaze of violence. The hunt had only just begun. Dawn came cold and brutal to the high peaks. Lyra woke in her chamber, clean and wrapped in fresh furs. Someone, Rook, had washed the blood from her skin while she slept, had moved the bodies, had restored what order could be restored to the violated den. Her entire body ached, but it was different from the ache of beatings. This was the deep soreness of muscles used in ways they'd never been used before. Of a transformation that had reshaped her from the inside out. She emerged to find Rook packing supplies with methodical efficiency. His hands were wrapped in bandages, the silver burns still visible at his wrists and throat. But he moved with purpose, organizing food, weapons, tools. What are you doing? Her voice came out rough, barely above a whisper. Getting you to safety. He didn't look up. There's a settlement 3 days west, outside pack territory. You'll be protected there. Understanding hit her like ice water. What about you? I'm going to the old pack. The words were flat, emotionless. I'll turn myself in, negotiate terms. You came willingly, you weren't kidnapped. They'll accept that and leave you alone. They'll kill you. Probably. He finally met her eyes. But you'll be free. Rage flared in Lyra's chest, not the wild, uncontrolled fury of last night, but something colder. Sharper. No. This isn't a discussion, Lyra. She moved to block the entrance, her eyes flashing amber as her wolf stirred just beneath the surface. You're right. It's not. Rook's expression hardened. Move. No. Garrett was right. They'll send an army. I can't fight them all, but I can make a deal that keeps you safe. By sacrificing yourself. Lyra's voice cracked but held firm. You think I survived 17 years of her fists just to lose you now? I'm trying to protect you. Then stay. The word came out as half shout, half growl. Because you're the only family I have. The admission hung in the air between them, raw and desperate. Rook's control finally fractured. You don't understand what they'll do. The pack doesn't negotiate, doesn't show mercy. They'll hunt us until one of us is dead. Then we run. Lyra stepped closer, her voice dropping but losing none of its intensity. Together. Because you saved me when everyone else looked away. You made me believe I was worth something. You taught me I was strong. Her hands clenched into fists. Now you don't get to leave. If I stay, we'll spend our lives running. Then we run. Tears streamed down her face, but her voice never wavered. Because you're my pack now. And I'm not losing my pack. Friends, if this story has moved you, if you felt Lyra's pain, her transformation, her fierce protection of the one person who showed her kindness, please like this video and subscribe. Share it with someone who needs to hear that chosen family can be stronger than blood. Now, let's see how their story ends. Silence filled the den. Snow fell softly outside, muffling the world. Rook's shoulders finally dropped, the fight draining out of him. When he spoke, his voice was rough with emotion he rarely showed. There's a place. High in the Forbidden Peaks. Territory so harsh no pack has ever claimed it. Can we survive there? Not alone. His grey eyes held hers. But two alphas, working together? Maybe. Hope blazed in Lyra's chest. Then we go higher. They packed only essentials, everything they could carry and nothing more. Rook taught Lyra to shift at will, though her control was still unpredictable. Sometimes the transformation came easily. Sometimes it hurt. But each time, she felt more connected to the golden wolf inside her. They left before dawn, abandoning the den but not destroying it. Let it stand as a decoy, a false trail. The climb was brutal. Higher than Lyra had ever gone, into elevations where even experienced wolves rarely ventured. The air grew thin, the cold sharp enough to cut. But Lyra's awakened wolf gave her strength she'd never had before. They traveled for 3 days, always ascending, leaving minimal tracks. Twice they heard howls in the distance, searchers, perhaps, or just the mountain's natural inhabitants. Each time, Rook and Lyra shifted and ran, covering ground faster on 4 legs than 2. On the 4th day, they reached a peak so high the world seemed to fall away beneath them. Here, Rook said, shifting back to human form. This is where we make our stand. They carved a new den into ice and stone, smaller than before but defensible. They hunted together, moving as one, their wolves learning each other's rhythms. In the evenings, they sat by carefully contained fires, and Rook taught Lyra to read the old languages inscribed in his books. 3 months passed. Winter deepened into the kind of cold that killed the unprepared. But Lyra thrived. Her control over her wolf improved daily. She could shift in seconds now, could hold the transformation for hours, could even manage partial shifts when needed. One night, as they sat in their den watching stars burn through the thin mountain air, Lyra broke the comfortable silence. Do you think they're still looking? Rook's arm tightened around her shoulders, a gesture that had become natural over weeks of survival together. Probably. But up here, we're ghosts. Legends. The golden wolf and the shadow. They'll never find us. Good. She leaned against him, safe and warm despite the killing cold outside. Do you regret it? Rook asked quietly, leaving everything behind. Lyra smiled, a real smile, the kind she'd never been able to manage in Thorn Hollow. I left nothing behind. Everything I need is right here. And it was true. In this highest reach of the Forbidden Peaks, where the air was thin and the stars burned cold and bright, 2 wolves had built a kingdom no one could touch. The girl who'd been beaten became an alpha who'd never bow again. The exile who'd walked alone finally found his pack. They say blood is thicker than water. But Lyra learned that chosen family, forged in fire and snow and transformation, was thicker than both. She never returned to the settlement. And she never looked back. The end.